Good morning to everyone, to all the participants for Bone Neurology Update 2021. Thank you, Mr. Clarence, for your kind introduction. The topic given to me today is Doctor, I was told I have soul in the kidney. So this is one of the common presentation that you can see in either in your primary healthcare, emergency department, or in our urology clinic. So basically, I'm going to talk about kidney stone today. So the content of my presentation will be epidemiology of urolithiasis, etiology, risk factor, management, and prevention of urolithiasis. When you go to the first topic is epidemiology, worldwide prevalence urolithiasis. If you see the prevalence is differ according to the geographical region. In North America, it's around 7 to 13 percentage. If it is in Europe, it's around 5 to 9 percentage. How about Asian country? Asian country can range from 1 to 20 percentage. If you see our neighboring country, China, Taiwan, and Japan, the range is around 1 to 5 percentage. How about urolithiasis in Malaysia? Okay, when we talk about incidence of prevalence study in Malaysia, we must always thank to Dr. Srinivasan Gopal, also regarded as the father of urology in Malaysia. He did a study on incidence of urinary stone in Malaysia. Then he did a 5-yearly study to survey the incidence of urolithiasis in Peninsular Malaysia. It shows a steady increase every 5 years from 1962 to 1977 and 1981. We see around from 150 to 300 per 100,000 population of Malaysia, which is a very steady increase. So how about study of urolithiasis in Sarawak? We can proudly say the urology department of Sarawak General Hospital, we did the first prevalence study in Sarawak, or I can say in Malaysia. We did the ultrasound based cross-sectional study to know the prevalence of urolithiasis in Sarawak and associated risk factor. So we screened around 1087 patients. Among the 1087 patients, 44 of them had ultrasound proven urolithiasis. This gives us a prevalence of 4.04 percentage, and it affects the male and female equally. The commonest age group is from the third decade to the sixth decade. So we also studied the risk factor. Among the 20 variables we studied, 4 of the variables give a significant p-value, which is personal history of urolithiasis, family history of urolithiasis, hypertension, and preference of salty food. So we can conclude that prevalence of urolithiasis in the study population is around 4.04 percentage in affect the male and females equally, with the commonest age group from 25 to 64 years old. Hypertension, prevalence of preference for salty food, family history, and personal history of urolithiasis is a risk factor in this cohort of patients. So the second part of the presentation will be risk factor of urolithiasis. We can divide into individual and environmental factor, or non-modifiable and modifiable risk factor. First, we go for the non-modifiable risk factor. Gender. In the history, male always are regarded to have high prevalence of urolithiasis, but in the current era, there is a gap, there is a narrowing in the gap between the male and female. If you see the ratio from 3 to 1 reduced to 1.5 to 1, means that now female and male has the almost equal prevalence of urolithiasis. If you see the race and ethnicity, whites of course have more prevalence of stone than Asian. Age is around 4 to 6 decades of life. Family history. If you have a family history of stone, you have a relatively high risk to get a stone as well. Modifiable risk factor, any condition can lead to supersaturation of urine, either hot or dry climates, occupation with the risk of dehydration. All this can lead to supersaturation of urine and lead to risk of stone formation. Obesity and metabolic syndrome. These are the common things that you see in emergency department or in a primary healthcare. So how this obesity and metabolic syndrome leads to a stone formation, like in diabetes and obesity, there have been studies show the increased excretion of calcium and uric acid in the urine, which lead to supersaturation of the solute and lead to stone formation. Hypertension attributed to the risk of preference of salty food, and also it associated metabolic syndrome that leads to formation of stone. Promoters versus inhibitor. In a prevention of stone, is always must advise the patient to increase the inhibitor and reduce the promoter. And the most important inhibitor is citrate, which is you can get in your citrus juice. How you classify stones? 75% of the stones has calcium in it. So you can divide into calcium forming stone or non-calcium containing stone. The most common calcium stone is calcium oxalate followed by hydroxyapatite. The non-calcium stone, the most common one is uric acid and strobite stone, which is an infective stone consists of magnesium, ammonium, and phosphate. Cesium stone is a genetic stone, and other non-common one is related to the drugs. Also, you can classify according to radio-opaque or radiolucent stone. Radiolucent stone, basically the most important one is the uric acid stone, ammonium urate stone, and xanthine stone or other drug-related stone. Other than that, most of the stones are radio-opaque. How you manage a patient of urolithiasis. Beside your history taking and physical examination, in history taking, of course, you need to rule out all the risk factors. Other than that, physical examination. Then the third one will be investigation. When you talk about investigation, two main components is urine and blood. In the urine, of course, we need a urine analysis. If it's indicated, you need to do a urine culture. Blood parameters. The three main important blood parameters are: first is renal profile, second is uric acid level, and third is the calcium. This is included in the stone workup. So when you refer a case of stone, you must have all these parameters when you refer to us. So imaging, basically three main imaging is X-ray KUB, ultrasound, and CT KUB. X-ray KUB is widely available. That's one of the advantage. The limitation is you can't see any radiolucent stone. An artifact like bowel gas or feces can obscure the stone. The second one is ultrasound KUB. Ultrasound KUB, the advantage is less radiation and it's also available in most of the centers. What is the limitation? You can't see if the stone is less than 4 mm. It's kind of difficult to see in ultrasound because it's operator dependent. And also, ultrasound KUB is good because you can see hydronephrosis or you can see any debris in the system which indicate infection. So the standard imaging is CT KUB, a non-contrasted CT KUB. If you see the sensitivity and specificity for a low dose CT is around 93% above. Other than seeing a stone, the other advantage of this CT KUB is you can measure the stone size, you can measure the radial density, you can see the perirenal anatomy and stone to skin distance, which can help you in the operative management. So how you manage a patient? Most of the time, the patient doesn't come to you saying that he has a stone. Usually, they come as a pain or infection. So if the patient comes with pain, pain relief is the most important management. So what is the best medication to relieve the pain? NSAID and paracetamol are effective and better than morphine. So if the patient is not contraindicated to NSAID, always give NSAID to the patient, either diclofenac or Cerebrex. If the patient is contraindicated to NSAID, then you can give other analgesia. Antispasmodic doesn't make any better pain control. So try to avoid antispasmodic if the patient comes with renal colic. So there's a study by Samir et al. It's a randomized study with the blinded properties where they compare diclofenac, morphine, and paracetamol. And as I mentioned just now, diclofenac was significantly more effective relieving the pain other than the morphine and paracetamol. So again, if the patient has no contraindication to NSAID, please give NSAID if the patient comes in for renal colic or urethral colic. So if the patient comes with sepsis or infection in the obstructed kidney, it's a neurological emergency. So how you manage a sepsis patient is the same as how you manage other sepsis patient. You classify them according to the SIRS or QSOFA criteria, and you treat them according to the surviving sepsis campaign. Give fluid first. If the patient doesn't respond to fluid, start vasopressor earlier and take a blood culture or urine culture. Administer broad spectrum antibiotic. And the main management of this obstructed kidney is decompression, either by indwelling urethral stent or percutaneous nephrostomy. Which one is better? Indwelling urethral stent or double J stent or percutaneous nephrostomy? This study by Margaret Pearl, which is the landmark study that compared these two methods, said that both are effectively good in relieving the obstructive system and to treat the infection. Neither modality is superior to each another. So you can choose which one to do according to your expertise and the facilities available in your center. So after you decompress, you treat the patient according to antibiogram. Then you delay the definitive management until the sepsis relief. So definitive treatment for renal stone can divide into conservative, chemolysis or medical therapy, and stone removal, surgery or procedure. So objective of stone treatment, you remove the source of infection, relieve the symptom, prevent the stone growth, and the most important thing, you prevent the renal loss. Conservative treatment basically is for patients who are not fit for surgery and as a small calcium stone. You follow up them into X-ray or ultrasound or even a CT to monitor the stone size and to detect the complication. Any trigger such as pain, infection, stone growth, or obstruction of course you need to go for a definitive active treatment. Or if the patient decided and the patient is fit for surgery, and you can go for a definitive active treatment. Chemolysis basically is for uric acid stone that form in an acidic urine. The principle is to alkalize the urine. The aim of pH is around 7 to 7.2. Either you can use a urine, which is a sodium bicarbonate, or potassium citrate, which is an alkaline citrate. It's basically for uric acid stone, which is from 5 mm to 1 cm. You can monitor the stone either using ultrasound KUV or repeated non-contrastive CT. Because it's a radiolucent stone, you cannot monitor using an X-ray KUV. Stone removal procedure. The first and the historical one is the ESWL. Basically, ESWL can be done outpatient. It's suitable for all the calyceal stone, which is less than 2 cm. But if it's a lower pole stone, because of the anatomical variation, we prefer the stone to be less than 1 cm. And the Hounsfield unit is less than 1000. Okay, this is how the ESWL will be done. This is the ESWL machine with the what you call fluoroscopic imaging. The patient will lie down, and the energy source, which either electrohydraulic or magnetic resonance, are transferred to the medium. Then the stone is fragmented. The fragment will go through the ureter, and patient can pass out through the bladder. Sorry, urethra. The contraindication, the two main contraindication is pregnancy and bleeding disorders. Uncontrolled UTI, skeletal abnormalities, any aneurysm or distal obstruction are relative contraindication. You can treat the patient accordingly. So endoscopic management can be divided into PCNL and RARS. PCNL means percutaneous nephrolytotomy. Basically, you poke through the skin into the calyceal system and you remove the stone. The standard access is 24 to 30 French. It preferably for the larger stone, diverticular stone, and stone that fail ESWL. So this is how a PCNL will be done either in supine prone position. You get the access into the calyceal system under ultrasound or fluoroscopic imaging. Then you dilate the tract using a dilator. Once you get into the kidney using a nephroscope, you fragment the stone using any of the energy source that are available, either pneumatic or ultrasonographic or laser. Then after that, you can put a drain either in the method of ureteral stent or percutaneous nephrostomy. So another method is retrograde intrarenal surgery. In this modern era, with the smaller scopes, improved deflection mechanism, we have a flexible URS scope that can go to all the calyceal that we can use to what they call a fragment the stone. So other than RARS, the RARS can be used to all kind of calyceal stone. Other than using for calyceal stone, also can be used to treat any tumor, a small tumor in the pelvic calyceal system. The last part of my presentation is prevention. Prevention is always better than cure. You always must advise the patient that if the patient has a stone, they have a 50% risk to get another stone in 5 years. So how to prevent? The first method, the most important one, is to hydrate yourself with water. So how much water that you need to take? If usually I'll advise the patient if they are more than 60 kilo, I'll ask them to take about 3 liters of water, 2 big mineral water, and I always tell them to take a plain water. So how they know it's adequate or not? If the water and the urine color is the same, it means they're adequate intake. If the urine color is concentrated, of course it's not adequate, then they're supposed to drink more. And the second method is dietary advice. Dietary advice, basically you need to reduce the salt intake and animal protein intake in their diet. Other than that, how about the calcium level? Calcium level, you must maintain a normal range. You cannot give high calcium or low calcium diet. Then of course the lifestyle modification, if the patient has high BMI, try to reduce the BMI by physical activity. If they have metabolic syndrome, treat the metabolic syndrome accordingly. So take home message, prevalence of stone is varied according to geographical region. Treat all the modifiable risk factor urolithiasis. And the last and not least, prevention is better than cure. Thank you. Any question will be asked in the second slide.